Hey guys, tonight we step back into the flickering fires of the Aztec Empire where justice was hot, punishments were bizarre, and even a small mistake might land you in a sweat lodge that feels more like a preheated oven than a rehabilitation center. You're standing in a bustling city of stone and smoke, the scent of cornmeal and chili heavy in the air. You hear drums in the distance somewhere, someone is probably being made an example of. In this world, punishment isn't a separate chapter of life, it's stitched right into daily survival. Everyone knows the rules, but the enforcement? That's where things get steamy, literally. You've just been accused of a minor offense, maybe you disrespected a superior, or perhaps you sneezed too loudly during a ceremonial chant. Either way, you're in trouble. And your fate? A temazcal, a traditional Aztec sweat lodge where punishment and purification blend into one moist, wheezing ordeal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and what time it is where you're listening. I'm curious who else is being lulled to sleep by ancient horrors tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Sweat Lodge isn't just a spa gone wrong, it's a stone dome packed tight with volcanic rocks heated to a hellish glow. You crawl inside and the air hits your face like a slap from a boiling wet towel. Welcome to your punishment. It starts off intense, heat pressing against your chest, sweat dripping into your eyes, lungs shrinking with each shallow breath. You're not allowed to leave until the elders say you've learned your lesson or passed out trying. The walls glisten with moisture, flickering from the torchlight outside. It smells like scorched herbs and damp earth, and someone has definitely vomited in here before. Probably multiple someones. Historians still argue whether this practice was strictly punitive or if it was also meant to spiritually cleanse offenders. Either way, you're praying for forgiveness with every stifling breath. The Aztecs believed that both the body and the soul could be detoxed through suffering, of course. No shortcuts. No apologies accepted without a little pain. Especially if you were young and rebellious. This punishment was often used on adolescents, the Aztec version of go sit in the corner, except the corner is a steam dungeon that peels your skin off like a ripe tomato. You try not to panic as someone outside throws more water onto the rocks. A loud hiss answers back, followed by another wave of blistering heat. Fun fact? The temazcal was also used by warriors after battle to purify themselves. Which means that after risking death on the battlefield, they were rewarded with a near-death experience in a hut. Nice. A lesser-known detail, the steam wasn't just water and herbs. Sometimes chili was added to the mix. Yes, chili. Not to eat, but to inhale. The capsicum compounds in the air caused intense burning in the eyes and throat. If you thought your last cold was rough, try surviving Aztec aromatherapy. And of course, you aren't alone. You're joined by a priest or healer who recites chants and rubs you with medicinal herbs because nothing says character development like being steamed and scrubbed like a dinner plate. You're supposed to reflect on your wrongdoing in here, but mostly you're reflecting on your terrible life choices that led to this spicy sauna. Mainstream historians agree this punishment was as much about shame as pain. You'd emerge red-faced, drenched, staggering, and sometimes crying in front of your entire community. And let's be honest, someone's always watching. Probably your crush. Probably while holding hands with your worst enemy. The punishment ends only when the elders deem you sufficiently wilted and regretful. You're pulled out by the arm like a soggy sock from the washing machine and allowed to collapse in the dirt, steam still curling from your pores. Welcome back to society. You're now a wiser, sweatier version of yourself. But here's the kicker, some people volunteered for this. Especially warriors or midwives. For them, the temazcal was sacred, a place to heal or commune with the gods. But for the wrongdoer, it was a full-body scolding in a stone oven. There's even evidence that some temazcales were reserved just for punishments bigger, hotter, less inviting, with lower ceilings making it hard to sit up. And maybe, just maybe, they tossed in some psychological torture, singing children's songs outside, mocking the punished, or making them crawl out backwards through the narrow tunnel like some kind of embarrassed mole. You don't even get a certificate afterward. No, I survived the Sweat Lodge sticker. Just the memory of burning eyes and a lesson you'll probably never forget. One fringe theory, still debated among scholars, suggests that some nobles received longer, more humiliating versions of this punishment involving symbolic rebirth. Crawling through tunnels, chanting repentance, emerging on the other side shaved, smeared in ash, and about as dignified as a wet cat. Of course, if you were a repeat offender, things could escalate. Maybe next time it won't be steam that teaches you, but a cactus, a canoe, or even a dance. Yes, a dance. But that's for later. For now, you're dragging your soggy self out of the temazcal, blinking against the sunlight, cheeks redder than your future punishment ledger, and praying nobody brings this up at dinner. You're barely recovered from your volcanic sauna ordeal when you make another mistake, this time a more tangible one. Maybe you took something that didn't belong to you. A shiny trinket at the market, a little extra maize from a neighbor's pile. Whatever it was, you thought you could get away with it. You didn't. Now you're kneeling on rough stone, heart pounding like a drum at festival time. You're about to meet one of the Aztec justice system's favorite tools, the cactus thorn. You look up and there it is looming behind a priest and a judge, a row of prickly pear cacti, their pads fat with moisture and bristling with hundreds of tiny, hair-like spines. If you're lucky, you'll only have to press your hand against one. If you're not lucky, it's your lips. Or cheeks. Or, because life is deeply unfair, your more delicate parts. The Aztecs had a flair for poetic punishment. And for petty theft. They believed in pain that didn't quite maim, but certainly left an impression. Literally, you're told to confess. And if you do, you might avoid a worse fate. But even a confession earns you some nopal therapy. They press the cactus gently, so gently, against your skin, and then pull it away. The spines go in clean. They do not come out clean. You look like a porcupine that's had a nervous breakdown. Historians still argue whether this punishment was used on children alone or adults too. Some sources suggest it was a coming-of-age consequence. A reminder that even a small theft could turn your next few nights into a game of don't roll over onto your face. In one fringe account, young boys caught stealing fruit were marched through the market with a cactus pad tied to their forehead. Others had spines inserted between their fingernails. Yes, that happened. Aztec parents did not believe in gentle parenting. And don't think the location made it private. Punishments like this were public. Community events. You'd be center stage, cheeks full of spikes, eyes watering, not just from pain, but from embarrassment. Someone's grandmother is watching. She's judging your life choices. She's probably munching corn and muttering, back in my day. To make things even worse, you're also stripped of your clothing. Not all of it PG-13, remember, but enough to make sure your shame is visible. The community sees not just what you did, but what happened because of it. There's a record of a particularly creative punishment for young offenders who stole food from the marketplace. They were tied up and placed next to the same goods they tried to take. Only now everyone could look but not touch. Like being stuck in front of a buffet after a juice cleanse. Mainstream scholars agree the Aztecs used embarrassment strategically. The idea wasn't just to hurt, it was to shame. Pain fades. A public spectacle? That sticks in people's memories like a cactus spine in your elbow. You're still kneeling, and someone finally hands you a cloth. It's a symbolic gesture, you've paid your price. You limp home, still plucking needles out of places you wish had never seen the light of day. And as you shuffle along, a few people nod solemnly. Others smirk. One kid whispers, "That's the guy with the cheek cactus. Fantastic. That nickname is probably going to stick." Now here's something curious. Some accounts describe a sort of forgiveness feast that followed certain punishments. The offender, once chastened, would offer a meal to those they wronged. Usually maize cakes, tamales, or spicy beans. A fringe belief holds that this wasn't just restorative justice, it was a test. Mess up the meal and boom, second punishment. Probably with bigger thorns. Of course, if you were a habitual thief, things escalated quickly. First offense? Spines. Second offense? Heavier spines, maybe some walking in circles with a sack of stones. Third time? Amputation. No more stealing because no more hands. Yes, that's a dark turn. No, you're not there yet. But it's good motivation to rethink your relationship with unattended avocados. Some punished individuals were also required to wear signs around their necks detailing their crimes. Imagine walking home with a wooden tablet hanging from your chest, carved with "I took tamales from Tenochtitlan Market." Kind of like an ancient Yelp review, only you're the one-star restaurant. And here's your scholarly debate of the night. Some historians believe the cactus punishments had religious undertones. That the spines symbolized both penance and spiritual renewal. Just like a bloodletting ritual, but budget-friendly. Others think it was just plain sadism with some cultural flair. Jury's still out. The next few days are slow. You walk stiffly. Every movement reminds you of those barbed kisses from the cactus pads. And in a way, it works. You're never stealing again. Not because you fear pain, but because you really can't bear hearing another grandmother say, "I remember the cactus boy?" But don't worry, you won't be alone in your suffering. Plenty of others have their own tales of justice, like that merchant who danced his way into infamy, or the farmer who tried to lie about his harvest. All of them got creative consequences, and for those who broke hearts or rules of romance, let's just say it involved feathers. Lots and lots of them, but that's for later. For now, sleep easy, unless you feel a little itchy tonight. Could be your imagination, or a phantom cactus spine. You think you've learned your lesson. You swear you'll never swipe so much as a corn kernel again. But alas, your sins are more social than criminal this time. You flirted with the wrong person. Maybe someone already promised to another. Or worse, you were caught in the act, an affair under moonlight, giggles echoing from behind a clay wall. And now your punishment isn't thorns. It's choreography. Yes, my friend. You are about to dance. Not just any dance, a full-blown, public, humiliating spectacle in a costume that leaves absolutely zero room for pride. The Aztecs loved pageantry. They didn't just punish, they performed it. And infidelity? That called for dramatic flair. You're brought before the community, not to be whipped or branded, but to become a one-person parade. First step? Feathers. You're draped in bright, clashing plumes, ostrich, quetzal, maybe even a toucan if they were feeling extra. Then the drumbeat starts. You're forced to dance. Not gracefully. Not skillfully. Just constantly. For hours, sometimes days. A ritual of embarrassment and fatigue where your every misstep is a reminder to the crowd, here dances the unfaithful. Or in some cases, the liar, the traitor, or the guy who should have kept his tunic on. Historians still argue whether this punishment was reserved for romantic betrayals or broader acts of disloyalty. Some sources point to it being a noble specific punishment, especially if the transgression couldn't be addressed with more standard methods like, say, execution. This was social death, and it left a deeper mark than a few lashes ever could. And here's the kicker, the costume might include bells. Yes, bells? So even when you're not dancing, you're jingling like a guilty wind chime. People can hear you coming from 3 blocks away, which, let's face it, really takes the mystery out of sneaking around. In fringe accounts, some dancers had to sing during the performance. Their confession. Sung. Publicly. Out of tune. It's like karaoke night, except the stakes are your dignity and the prize is lifelong mockery. You're not alone either. Some punishments included group dances, especially when more than one person was caught in the scandal. You're paired off, spinning in circles, feathers flying, occasionally bumping into each other like guilty birds at a very awkward wedding. And because Aztecs were nothing if not thorough, you might also have to dance through specific parts of the city. Like a mobile morality tale. Through the temple district. The market. The school. You pass priests, vendors, children, all of them judging. Some are probably rating your moves. Spoiler, you're not getting more than 2 stars. There's even record of dancers being smeared with ash or paint, symbols of shame. Blackened faces to mark their wrongdoings. Add a painted tongue, perhaps, to represent deceit. Think of it as historical face paint, but instead of team spirit, you're wearing guilt. And of course, there's always that fringe theory that the dance was secretly a ritual of transformation. A symbolic shedding of one identity and the forced taking on of another. Some historians think these performances might have had spiritual undertones. Others believe it was just the Aztec version of community theater meets punishment. Either way, your calves are burning. As the hours pass, you grow dizzy. Your body aches. The feathers are itchy. Sweat pours down your painted face. But you don't stop. Because if you do, more punishment. Maybe a second dance. Or worse, they assign you a musical instrument and make you accompany someone else's shame spiral. Mainstream scholars agree the purpose here wasn't just suffering, it was humiliation wrapped in entertainment. These punishments were sometimes scheduled alongside festivals. So, while others feasted and watched dances of the gods, you provided the comic relief, a human cautionary tale doing the cha-cha of disgrace. And here's the juicy part, some nobles actually had rehearsals for these punishments. Can you imagine? Being taught how to shame dance? Practicing in private, knowing full well it will all unravel under the sun in front of half the city? But not all dances ended in disgrace. Occasionally they led to forgiveness. A particularly penitent performance could be seen as a genuine apology. The community might decide you'd suffered enough. You'd still be a punchline for a while, but maybe they'd stop jingling their bracelets every time you walked by. Of course, that all depends on your commitment. Half-hearted hip wiggles? More feathers next time. A sincere expression and a near collapse from exhaustion? Maybe mercy. And the worst part? The children laugh. A lot. Some even mimic your dance afterward. You've officially become the bedtime story for future generations. Behave or you'll end up like Featherfoot the Fool. After the ordeal, you're stripped of your costume. Your muscles are jelly. Your pride is gone. You collapse onto your mat that night with every bone aching and your ego somewhere back near the temple steps. But hey, you lived. And sometimes that's the best case scenario. Remember, you could have been tied to an anthill. But that's later. Tonight, you're just sore, sweaty, and semi-redeemed. You wake up sore, embarrassed, and maybe still shedding the occasional feather from your hair. You try to move on. Really? You keep your head down, help out at the market, make sure to avoid flirting with anyone attached. But the gods or fate or just your extremely poor decision-making aren't done with you yet. This time, it's your mouth that gets you in trouble. Not for eating the wrong fruit or confessing your cactus trauma to the neighbors, but for something much simpler, lying. You told a fib. A small one, maybe. Maybe you said your corn yield was better than it really was. Or you denied dropping your neighbor's ceramic jug. Or you swore you didn't hear the priest call your name during temple cleanup duty. Just little things. Little Aztec things. Too bad the Aztecs hated liars. Lying was more than impolite, it was a social toxin. A direct offense to the values of truth, balance, and trust that kept society from unraveling. So naturally, the punishment for lying was, how do we say this delicately? Painful. You are led into the center of your neighborhood's courtyard again. And there, sitting ominously on a woven mat, is a mixedly or smoking torch. You're told to open your mouth. Yep. You see where this is going. One of the most feared punishments for lying in Aztec society involved burning chili smoke. They would grind chili peppers, the really spicy ones, the kind that even modern taco stands warn you about, and toss them into hot coals or a clay censer. The smoke? Oh, it doesn't just sting. It scorches. You're forced to inhale it, nose and mouth wide open, while elders chant something vague and deeply unhelpful about purifying false tongues. Your eyes water immediately. Your nose runs like a mountain spring. Your throat tightens in fiery betrayal. You cough and wheeze and swear you'll never speak again, which is kind of the point. Historians still argue whether this punishment was exclusive to children or applied to adults too. Some believe it was a standard disciplinary tool in schools, especially the Kalmukak, where noble youth trained to become priests. Others argue that peasants and nobles alike could face the spicy wrath of truth enforcement, especially if the lie had community consequences. Fringe accounts describe variations. In one version, a liar had to chew raw chili and hold it in their mouth during a walk around the temple courtyard. If you spat it out, they added more. If you cried, they mocked your weak sauce tolerance. In another version, brace yourself, the punishment involved blowing chili smoke into your ears. Allegedly, this was a symbolic reminder to listen for truth. More likely, it was just someone with a twisted sense of justice and a flair for metaphor. And if your lie caused real harm, say, false accusations or misleading someone into debt, you weren't just punished. You had to make amends in a more tangible way. You might be forced to publicly admit your lie, repay damages, or endure both and the chili. Basically, the full spicy package. Mainstream sources point out that public shaming was a critical element. You weren't just punished privately, everyone had to see your face contort from the chili smoke. It was a visual cue, a living warning sign, this is what happens to liars. Some Aztec elders, known for their poetic leanings, even had a saying, the tongue that lies must taste fire. Romantic, right? Unless you're the one doing the tasting. There's one particular anecdote, a fringe tale not all historians buy, about a man who lied about his fishing success. He boasted of catching the biggest axolotl in the lake, but in truth, he bought it from a traveling merchant. When the deception was uncovered, he was made to sit with his mouth open over a pot of chili smoke for an entire day. By nightfall, he'd lost his voice, his pride, and most of his upper respiratory function. Of course, this punishment wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Imagine being the person people avoid not because you're dangerous, but because they know you lie. You become that guy. The one who can't be trusted with even a tortilla count. That sticks. And in a society where communal trust ran deep, that was a scar worse than the burn. Scholars also point to the spiritual layer. Lying disrupted cosmic order. The Aztecs believed in balance between truth and reality. A lie wasn't just a social crime, it was a cosmic one. And chili smoke? A kind of earthly purifier. Less holy water, more holy guacamole. Sometimes, if the lie was told in a ritual setting, the consequences were even more severe. You might be barred from participating in certain ceremonies. For a deeply spiritual culture, that was like being unfollowed by the gods. Now, to be fair, not all liars faced chili. Some just had to perform penance, sweeping the temple steps, fasting, or undergoing a public apology. But when it came to repeat liars, the chili came back with a vengeance. And occasionally, they added in the OL feather costume dance combo. Yep, just imagine doing the jingle-jangle salsa while your mouth is still tingling with ghost pepper trauma. You return home from your ordeal gasping for water. You swear you can feel the chili on your soul. And as you pass a group of elders sipping Atoll and gossiping, you hear one mutter that one will never lie again. They're not wrong. At least not until you can taste food without weeping. Later that night, as you lie in the dark, your lips still buzzing and your throat dry, you promise yourself, next time you'll just admit you broke the jug. No spicy truth vapors required. You've barely recovered from the chili smoke ordeal, your tongue still tingles, your throat feels like it made a pact with fire, and every time you pass a cooking hearth, you flinch. But life, as always in the Aztec world, marches on. Today, you're just trying to keep a low profile. Maybe help with the maize harvest, maybe avoid eye contact with literally anyone. But as luck or karma would have it, you've once again found yourself in trouble. This time, you were lazy. Yes, laziness. A crime? To the Aztecs? Absolutely. You skipped your community duties. You slept past sunrise. Maybe you sat in the shade a little too long when there was still firewood to be gathered or temple floors to be swept. In a world that prized hard work and ritual precision, being sluggish wasn't just frowned upon, it was practically sacrilegious. So now, it's public humiliation time again. This time, they bring out the sticky black resin. Bitumen. Or more accurately, a type of natural tar used by the Aztecs for a variety of practical purposes, waterproofing canoes, gluing tools, and now, gluing you to things. That's right, for laziness, you are symbolically and literally stuck. They smear your hands or your feet, or, in some unfortunate cases, both with sticky resin and then press you against a wall, or the floor, or even a large rock in the middle of the courtyard. And there you stay. Not forever, of course. Just long enough for everyone to laugh, point, and perhaps toss a kernel of maize at you for emphasis. It's symbolic. You're stuck because you wouldn't move. You're immobilized because you refuse to act. The message is clear, this is what happens when you let the day go to waste. Historians still argue whether this resin-sticking punishment was widely used or more of a fringe practice in specific towns. Some claim it's a mix of mythology and misinterpretation, others think it was absolutely real and reserved for youth training in the Telpakali, the school for commoner boys. Their laziness was treated with the seriousness of treason. And here's where it gets even more absurd. In some versions, if the resin didn't stick well enough, they'd add mud and feathers. So now you're not just stuck, you're dirty, fluffy, and surrounded by a crowd that's very much enjoying this. Oh, and remember how in previous punishments, dancing was a form of disgrace? Well, if you were particularly unmotivated, they might make you dance after the resin wears off. A sticky, squelchy shuffle across the square. It's like the Aztec version of walk it off, but with extra goo. And what if you refused to get stuck? If you resisted the punishment, that's when they'd escalate. One recorded punishment involved being thrown into a cold river at dawn. Repeatedly, until your energy levels were deemed acceptable. Nothing says motivation like hypothermia. There's a fringe tale, unconfirmed but too good to ignore, about a boy who wouldn't wake up early for his priestly studies. After 3 warnings, he was tied to a giant grinding stone, the kind used to crush maize, and forced to roll it through the temple district while chanting motivational slogans. The Aztecs really knew how to turn productivity into performance art. More mainstream sources describe an older punishment used for grown adults who refused to participate in communal labor. Instead of resin or water torture, they were assigned what could only be described as busywork exile. You'd be sent to a distant field, made to dig ditches, uproot stones, or carry baskets of sand from one place to another. Not because the work was needed, but because you needed it. And of course, while you're out there, alone, toiling with no end in sight, other community members pass by and see you. They know exactly why you're there. You've become a lesson, a breathing billboard for, don't skip temple cleanup again. The Aztecs didn't use prisons the way modern societies do. Punishment was immediate, visible, and often performed in a way that turned correction into cautionary tale. And laziness? That was seen not just as a personal failing, but a threat to the social fabric. One slack worker in a team effort could mean a botched harvest, a failed temple repair, or a missed sacrifice deadline. Laziness wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. And don't think the nobility got a free pass. If a noble child slacked off, they weren't glued or dunked. They were forced into manual labor, stripped of noble status, and sent to work in the fields with the peasants. A sort of reverse promotion. One fringe record even describes a pampered youth sentenced to carry dung to fertilizer pits for an entire season. The same noble later became a famously hard-working official. Coincidence? Probably not. Back to you, though. You've managed to wriggle free of the resin finally. You're hot, you're sticky, and you smell vaguely of tree sap and shame. You shuffle home hoping no one noticed. They did. They always do. Later that night, someone leaves a broom outside your door. A silent reminder. A passive-aggressive offering from the gods of industriousness. You pick it up. You sweep. You reflect. And maybe, just maybe, you wake up on time tomorrow. You wake up with a sense of pride. You rose before the sun, swept the courtyard, and even managed to chant your morning prayers without dozing off once. It's progress. Maybe, just maybe, you're turning a corner. But let's not celebrate too soon. Because today, you're accused of stealing. Now, before you protest, maybe it was just a snack left unattended, or maybe someone dropped a shiny jade bead and you happened to find it. Understand this. In the Aztec world, theft wasn't a petty crime. It was a cosmic offense. A tear in the carefully woven fabric of balance, honor, and ritual order. So here you are again, standing awkwardly in the middle of the community square. All eyes on you. Your stomach churns, and not from chili smoke this time. The elders approach. One carries a bundle of wooden rods. Another holds a stone slab. You gulp. Because you know what this means. Beatings. Public. And humiliating. For minor thefts like food, a few cacao beans, or a small trinket, the punishment often began with public flogging. You're made to kneel on the stone slab, and then those wooden rods go to work across your back, legs, and arms. It's not random. There's a rhythm to it. A ceremony. The pain isn't just corporal, it's moral, spiritual, and deeply embarrassing. You wince, flinch, bite your lip to avoid crying out. Not because you're stoic, but because you know the crowd is watching for weakness. They want a lesson, and you're the example. Historians still argue whether flogging was a universal punishment for all thieves or reserved for first-time offenders. Some suggest nobles received more dignified punishments, like restitution and exile, while commoners bore the brunt of the physical penalties. Others say theft was one of the few crimes where everyone, regardless of status, was treated equally, especially if the item stolen had religious significance. Now here's where it gets quirky. If your theft involved temple property, the punishment took a strange turn. One fringe tradition says that you'd be dressed in elaborate mock ceremonial robes, made of paper and cactus fiber, and paraded through the marketplace as a false priest. You'd chant meaningless prayers while vendors pelted you with old maize cakes and overripe tomatoes. Not exactly the spiritual enlightenment you were hoping for. There's also a bizarre ritual involving ants. Yes, ants. According to some fringe accounts, repeat thieves, especially children, had their hands tied and placed near anthills where they'd be bitten repeatedly. Symbolic? Sure. Extremely itchy? You bet. For more serious thefts, say, stealing from a noble's home or sabotaging trade goods, the punishment escalated to enslavement. You'd be forced to work off your debt by serving the person you wronged. It could be a few moons or the rest of your life, depending on the value of what you took. And here's the kicker. Enslavement in the Aztec world wasn't always a life sentence. There were escape clauses. You could regain your freedom by completing specific tasks, or if your master mistreated you publicly. But even then, the stigma remained. You were that thief, and the community didn't forget easily. There's a well-known anecdote, mainstream enough to be believable, about a man who stole from a traveling merchant. When caught, instead of being flogged, he was forced to carry the merchant's goods on foot from city to city for an entire trading season. No sandals, no shade, just miles of rocky road and smug traders. He later became a devoted merchant himself, probably because he knew exactly how much it hurt to carry unearned cocoa. And just when you think things couldn't get worse, some accounts mention tattooing or branding for habitual thieves. A small mark, usually on the arm or face, served as a permanent reminder of your sticky fingers. Some designs were shaped like eyes, so all would see your crime. Talk about literal consequences. But not all punishments were about pain. The Aztecs believed in restorative justice, too. If you confessed and returned the item before being caught, you could sometimes avoid punishment altogether. That's why some savvy offenders staged dramatic confessions at the last second. "Oh no, I just remembered. This jade necklace? Not mine after all." And hoped for leniency. It didn't always work. And, of course, spiritual restitution mattered too. You might be made to offer sacrifices to Tlazolteotl, the goddess of filth and purification. She was known for forgiving sinners, but only after they truly suffered for their misdeeds. So yes, after your flogging, you'd be expected to leave a heartfelt offering. Maybe some incense, maybe a bloodletting rite. Either way, the message was clear: cleanse your soul, or the universe keeps score. So here you are now. Your back stings, your pride is crushed, and you've got a new nickname, Little Fingers, probably. The crowd disperses slowly, like they're disappointed your beating didn't last longer. Later that night, someone leaves a small pouch of cacao beans at your doorstep. No note, just a quiet signal someone still believes in second chances. Or maybe they just hope you'll stop trying to steal theirs. As you curl up in your sleeping mat, sore and humiliated, you make a silent vow: never again. Next time you're tempted, you'll walk away. Or at least pretend not to see it. You've learned your lesson. No more sticky fingers. No more snoozing past sunrise. You're practically a model citizen now, if a little sore, still smelling faintly of burnt resin and dried chili. But fate, ever ironic, has a new accusation for you. This time, you lied. Maybe it was something small, like telling your neighbor you'd fed the temple's sacred ducks when really you forgot. Or maybe you told your parents you were studying when you were off napping in the shade again. Regardless of the details, someone told someone else, and now everyone knows. And lying? Lying is serious. Because in Aztec society, truth was divine currency. The gods thrived on order, honesty, and duty. Your little fib wasn't just a personal flaw, it was a cosmic offense. So what do they do to liars? Well, today your punishment begins with obsidian shards. Yep, those shiny, razor-thin black flakes that catch the sunlight like blades. They're beautiful, but not in a way you want pressed against your skin. They take a few of these slivers carefully, almost ceremoniously, and press them gently, methodically, under your fingernails. You try not to yelp. Not because you're brave, but because the whole village is watching. Again, it's not meant to cause lasting damage, though some scholars think deeper cuts were used for more severe offenses, but the discomfort is undeniable. A whisper of pain, constant, sharp, and symbolic. Because just as you tried to sneak truth beneath the surface, now something sharp hides beneath your nails. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or more of a moral parable told in youth schools. Some suggest it was only for students of the Kalmakak, the elite religious academy where discipline was almost monastic. Others think it was symbolic, meant more to shame than to scar. But the records are clear on one thing: lying was not tolerated. And for chronic fibbers? The punishments escalated. There's an odd little tale, part folk legend, part cautionary tale, of a boy who kept lying about temple dreams to get out of work. He claimed the gods spoke to him and demanded he rest. Clever, right? The priests didn't think so. Eventually, after many lies and increasingly inventive dreams involving maize gods and cloud serpents, they had enough. His punishment? He was made to sleep in the temple alone for 5 nights with only a small bowl of water and a bundle of burning copal incense. They told him, if the gods want to speak to you, let them. He emerged terrified. Either the silence was maddening or something did speak back. But for the average liar, it was usually something more theatrical. Like the smoke mask. They'd craft a cone-shaped mask of woven reeds and cactus paper, stuff the tip with burning incense, and place it over your face. You'd inhale the pungent, eye-watering smoke as a symbolic cleansing. One fringe record even describes this as part of a ceremony called Tlatlacualizli, which loosely translates to cleansing of the word. The irony? You couldn't even speak while it was happening, poetic justice at its finest. And if you lied under oath? Or worse, in a religious ceremony, that could push your punishment to full-blown exile. Yes, you'd be walked to the edge of town, given a meager pack of food, and told never to return unless summoned by a priest or the ruling council. In some cases, they painted your face with ashes and red pigment so other cities would know what you'd done. A human spoiler alert. And here's the quirky part. In some merchant circles, they didn't punish liars with pain, they punished them with confusion. Caught exaggerating your wares? They'd make you work as a market announcer, shouting out deliberately absurd product descriptions. Come see the cheese that sings. Feathers that predict rain. Beans that dance under moonlight. It sounds funny, but it was humiliating. You'd become the joke you tried to play on others. There's a theory, still debated but intriguing, that this practice of comedic correction originated in distant trading outposts where punishments had to be both immediate and resource-light. After all, obsidian wasn't always available, but sarcasm? That was universal. Meanwhile, your particular lie has earned you a simple but effective sentence, a fast. For 3 days, you're forbidden to eat maize, chili, cacao, or anything flavorful. Just bland water and white amaranth gruel. A diet so boring it feels like punishment all by itself. And while you fast, you're made to carry a wooden sign around your neck painted with the glyph for 2 mouths. Subtle? No. Effective? Very. By the 2nd day, everyone in town knows. Children whisper and giggle. Elders shake their heads. And you just nod. Accept the ridicule, and focus on not drooling over someone else's tamales. Night comes. Your stomach growls. Your pride stings worse than your obsidian-scratched fingers. But in the quiet, under the pale glow of temple torches, you realize something. The truth might be painful, but lying, it's exhausting. By now, you've gotten familiar with the rhythms of Aztec justice, sharp, symbolic, and always public. You've been flogged, fasted, and figuratively roasted more than once. But just when you think you've seen the full menu of punishments, along comes something so absurdly theatrical you almost laugh. You've been declared lazy. Yes, lazy. It sounds almost silly, doesn't it? A charge as vague and subjective as not doing enough. But in the Aztec world, laziness wasn't just a personal failing, it was a social disease. A threat to the collective harmony. Because if you don't carry your weight, someone else has to carry double. And so you're sentenced to one of the more peculiar punishments on the docket. You're turned into a living alarm clock. Here's how it works. At the crack of dawn, you're painted head to toe in bright yellow ochre, the color of the morning sun. Then you're handed a hollow turtle shell drum, a conch trumpet, and a basket of maize cakes. Your job? Wake every household in your district before the sun rises. And if you're late, you start all over. You knock, you drum, you sing. Wake up, noble warriors. Wake up, fair weavers. The sun won't climb without your feet. Your voice cracks halfway through. A child throws a chili pot at you. You're not allowed to complain. This continues for 8 days. During this time, you're banned from sitting down in public. If you're caught resting, you're made to carry a log across your back, balanced with weights at both ends, symbolic of the burden your laziness imposed on others. Some fringe reports claim these logs were inscribed with glyphs representing your neglected duties, plowing, weaving, grinding maize. Others say the logs were deliberately awkwardly shaped, so no matter how you shifted, it always poked something. Historians still argue whether these punishments were strictly enforced citywide or mostly used in youth and military academies. Some suggest these methods were primarily educational, while others argue that in agricultural communities, laziness was considered tantamount to sabotage, especially during planting season. Now, if you're noble-born and lazy, the humiliation was extra spicy. You might be shaved bald, your robes downgraded to coarse maguey fiber, and you'd be forced to tend the fields with commoners. Picture that. Your elegant speech, your delicate hands, now blistered from turning the earth beside grinning farmers who absolutely remember all the times you strutted past them without a glance. There's one particularly weird punishment for noble slackers described in a fringe codex. Being bound to a pulley and rope contraption, dragged back and forth across the central courtyard while the community took turns reciting your failures. Not whipping, not beating, just relentless, poetic shame on repeat. And yes, one of the scholars who studied this noted that it probably worked better than most scoldings from your mom. But what about teenagers? You ask because, let's be honest, if anyone's going to skip work, sneak naps, or accidentally forget their duties, it's the youth. The Aztecs had a solution for that too. For lazy children, especially those enrolled in the Telpacali, the commoner school for future warriors, punishment was swift and a little spicy. Literally. Offenders were taken to a small hut and held inside while chili smoke was funneled through holes in the walls. It burned the eyes, nose, and throat. Just breathing became a chore. After a few minutes of coughing, weeping, and swearing eternal obedience, they were let out. And no, it wasn't just the boys. Girls too, if caught dodging chores or disrespecting their elders, might be subjected to similar smoky treatment or made to sweep the entire school compound with a tiny broom for days. There's even a story of one girl who was caught feigning illness to skip weaving. Her punishment? She had to weave a full-length garment entirely from thread she herself spun out of dog hair. Took her 2 seasons and endless sneezing. In some households, repeated laziness was answered with sleeping mat removal. You'd be forced to sleep standing or crouched without comfort to remind you of the gift of rest and how little you'd earned it. That's right. Even sleep had to be deserved. One open scholarly question surrounds the idea of forced apprenticeship. Some sources suggest that persistent idlers were placed with hard-nosed artisans or strict warriors for a term of reconditioning, a kind of ancient boot camp. Others think this was more symbolic, a warning more than a widespread practice. Still, you can imagine the horror of waking up one day to find yourself enrolled in a full-year obsidian carving program with Master Chicketson, the notoriously humorless lapidary. And you can bet he doesn't believe in bathroom breaks. But back to your punishment. After 8 days of being the community rooster, you're finally allowed to stop drumming. Your arms are numb. Your fingers raw. Your voice hoarse. But you have undeniably become the hardest-working lazy person in town. And that's kind of the point. Your neighbors start nodding respectfully. A street vendor offers you a tamale with extra salsa, no charge. An old man gives you a pat on the back and says, not bad for someone who couldn't wake up last week. You smile, exhausted but secretly proud. Because if the gods were watching, and in this world, they always are, they just might be impressed. You're finally settling into something like normalcy, if anything in your life could still be called that. No chili smokes, no obsidian splinters, no log-carrying strolls of shame. You wake early. You work hard. You even stop lying about feeding the ducks. Things are looking up. Until you mess up again. This time, it wasn't a crime of violence or deceit. You spoke out of turn. Seems minor, doesn't it? A few careless words at the market. A complaint muttered during a ritual. A snide comment about how the priest's headdress looked like a bird that lost a bet. You didn't mean it to be public, but a nearby vendor absolutely did not miss a syllable. In the Aztec world, speaking out of turn wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. Words held power. They could shift public opinion, challenge hierarchy, even offend the gods. And in a society built on cosmic balance and strict social order, your tongue might as well be a weapon. So, punishment time. Your sentence? Tongue thorns. No, not a new cactus-based breakfast cereal. This punishment involves literal thorns, often from maguey plants, pressed or poked into your tongue. Not deep enough to cause lasting harm, but just enough to sting, to bleed, to remind you that words have weight. Some scholars say this was part of a broader confession ritual, where wrongdoers offered blood through self-piercing to show contrition. Others believe the tongue thorns were public, punitive, and specifically designed for verbal offenses, gossip, sarcasm, mockery. Historians still argue whether this punishment was standardized or reserved for specific offenses like mocking elders or interrupting religious chants. But the depictions don't lie. Kneeling figures, tongues outstretched, thorns in hand, surrounded by quiet onlookers. It's all very pointed. You kneel too. The priest, or sometimes an elder from your kalpuli, your neighborhood unit, approaches with ceremonial solemnity. A small wooden dish collects the drops of blood as they fall. You're told to recite a prayer while enduring it. A clever tactic, speak while being punished for speaking and see what your mouth can really handle. You choke halfway through. You swallow awkwardly. You wince. When it's over, your mouth is sore, your pride bruised, but your status surprisingly intact. Because in Aztec culture, punishment wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to rebalance. If you accept your punishment with humility, you're actually redeemed, not ruined. Still, the whispers linger. So they add an extra flair. For 2 days, you must wear a headband with painted rabbit ears. Why rabbits? Because in Aztec iconography, the rabbit often symbolized drunkenness, silliness, or ungoverned speech, things that flowed too freely and tripped over their own feet. It's both symbolic and absolutely humiliating. You try not to make eye contact. There's even a fringe account of one man who, after too many offenses involving careless speech, was made to serve as a silent guard at a temple gate for a full moon cycle. No talking. Not even a whisper. If he spoke, he had to start over. Apparently, by the end, he'd learned the true art of silence, or at least the pain of stifling a sneeze for 30 nights. In more elite settings, like among the priesthood or noble families, the punishment for speech crimes could get more poetic. You might be required to compose and perform a formal apology using flower metaphor poetry known as in Xochitl in Quetzalcoatl, flower and song. Imagine having to stand before your peers and deliver an ornate verse like, I, whose tongue once ran like the wild axolotl, now plant quiet roses in its place. If it sounds mortifying, that's the point. One noble was even made to perform his poem while wearing a clay pot over his head. Why? To remind him how sound echoes in an empty vessel, said the scribe who recorded it. That's either extremely deep or extremely petty. And if the offense was public slander, things escalated. There are records suggesting that slanderers, especially those who insulted religious figures, were forced to carry statues of the offended deity for an entire day. Heavy, intricately carved effigies. And if the statue cracked or fell? Well, let's just say that's another punishment for another section. For you, it doesn't go that far. Just the tongue thorns, the rabbit ears, and 2 full days of public silence, during which you must mime everything, your requests, your greetings, even your apologies. You learn how hard it is to say sorry without words and how expressive your eyebrows can be when you really need a tortilla. It's surprisingly effective. People start to understand your remorse. Some even laugh with you, not at you. A child brings you a flower. A vendor slips you an extra pepper. And when your silence ends, the first words you speak are not jokes, not complaints, not idle chatter. They're thank yous. Because your voice? You've learned it's worth something. And next time you're tempted to call the priests had a feathered tortilla, you'll probably, hopefully, just whisper it into your sleeve. You're still licking your wounds, metaphorically and, well, literally, from the whole tongue-thorn episode. It's been a humbling week of silence, exaggerated gestures, and resisting the urge to roll your eyes at every temple announcement. But you're back in society's good graces, your voice is yours again, and all seems calm. Until you drop a ceramic bowl. An accident, really? A butterfingered moment. But unfortunately, it was ceremonial. A ritual bowl, part of a harvest blessing, hand-painted, blessed, and placed carefully at the center of the Kalpuli gathering hall. And now it's, well, everywhere. In shards. On the floor. Beneath your foot. A collective gasp. A long silence. Then someone mutters the dreaded word, disrespect. In Aztec culture, breaking sacred objects wasn't just a mess to clean up, it was a cosmic imbalance. These objects were thought to house energy, to link people and gods. Breaking one disrupted the balance between the earthly and the divine. You didn't just offend the community, you offended the gods. Which brings you to your next bizarre punishment, symbolic burial. Yes, you heard that right. You were to be buried alive, but symbolically. A full-blown ritual drama staged not to kill you, but to humble you, to make you reflect, and to show the community and the gods that you've been metaphorically reborn with better hands. It begins at dawn. You're stripped of your outer garments, given a thin cotton wrap, and painted in black ash paste. Your hair is tied in a single knot, a style often reserved for penitents or those in mourning. Then you're led by torchlight to a freshly dug shallow pit outside the village edge. You lie down inside, curled like a child in the womb. You're covered with palm leaves, flower petals, and a light layer of earth, just enough to weigh on your chest without crushing your breath. It's warm. It smells of soil and crushed marigolds. And above you, the village elders begin a low chant. The chant is said to echo the sounds of the underworld, a blend of owl calls, flutes, and rhythmic drumming that mimics the heartbeat of Mictlan, the realm of the dead. You lie there for the length of a sunshadow, roughly 1 hour. No moving. No speaking. Just listening. Reflecting. Marinating in your own embarrassment and existential dread. Some fringe accounts say participants were made to whisper apologies to each broken shard before being buried. Others mention dreams, visions people claim to have while underground. A few claim to have seen Tezcatlipoca himself, the smoking mirror god, scowling beneath the soil. Historians still argue whether the burial was purely symbolic or whether, in earlier periods, it may have involved more elaborate psychological tests like being left in darkness overnight with symbolic trials to face. There's one tale, likely apocryphal, of a young man who broke a temple figurine and was buried along with a sacred lizard, believed to carry messages between the worlds. When he emerged, he swore the lizard had whispered the god's forgiveness in his ear. Or maybe he just needed more sun. Back to you. After the chant's end, you are gently unearthed, cleansed with water infused with copal and maize pollen, and handed a single shard of the bowl you broke. You're told to carry it with you for 13 days, the Aztec number of cosmic cycles. During this time, you must wear neutral colors, avoid feasting, and not speak during communal meals, a mini-vow of humility. And here's the kicker, if you break the shard you're carrying, the punishment starts over. So now you're walking everywhere with this jagged little pottery triangle tucked like a cursed business card in your sash, terrified of tripping on a root or sneezing too hard. One fringe community in the Highlands is said to have taken this a step further. Offenders were required to reassemble the broken item using only natural adhesives, tree sap, spider silk, or, in one unfortunate case, their own saliva. It almost never worked. But the failure was part of the point. In larger cities like Tenochtitlan, breaking a sacred object during a major ritual could even lead to temporary exile. Not forever, just long enough for everyone to miss you a little and for you to get a good long look at how lonely a world without your community feels. There's even a codex page depicting a weaver who dropped her goddess figurine and was banished to a reed hut by the lake for 4 moons, tasked with feeding waterfowl and weaving mourning cloths. When she returned, they say her weaving had never been better and she never touched the sacred shelf again. But you? You do your 13 days. You carry your shard. You sleep with it beside you like it might whisper instructions in the night. You eat simply. You speak less. You start looking at your surroundings, your tools, your bowls, even your sandals, with a kind of reverence you never thought possible. And when your time is up, you return the shard to the ceremonial hall. Displaced with others, a mosaic of mistakes, a visual record of imperfection and learning. You bow. You breathe. And this time, when you pass the new ritual bowl on the altar, you give it an extra wide berth. Just in case your elbows get any funny ideas. You've survived being symbolically buried alive. You've hauled logs, worn rabbit ears, and bled from the tongue. By now, your inner monologue has developed a survival instinct of its own. One that kicks in whenever you so much as think about touching anything sacred. So naturally, your next mistake isn't physical at all. It's spiritual. You oversleep. Specifically, you miss the dawn ceremony for Tlazolteotl, the goddess of purification and forgiveness. A bit ironic, really. This was your one shot at spiritual cleansing, clearing out the cosmic backlog of misdeeds. A sort of divine spring cleaning, and you snored straight through it. It's not just personal shame. It's public disrespect. The entire Kalpuli noticed your absence because these ceremonies involve the whole neighborhood. Everyone saw that empty mat where you should have been kneeling, incense stick in hand, doing your part to restore the balance. And so the elders decide it's time for the punishment of invisible burdens. Sounds poetic, right? Almost like a metaphor? It's not. This punishment involves carrying invisible objects, symbolic weights meant to represent the spiritual load you've dumped onto the community by shirking your duties. Your task: for 4 days, you must go about your daily life while acting as though you are carrying a full-sized stone idol on your back. You have to walk, bend, grunt convincingly, adjust invisible straps over your shoulders. If you drop your idol, you must fall to the ground and weep audibly, then reenact picking it back up. And yes, there's always someone watching. The goal isn't pain. It's humiliation by performance. You're embodying the guilt you didn't confess during the missed ritual. Now everyone can see the burden you refuse to acknowledge. The invisible burden's punishment has popped up in several codices, though always in different forms. Some show the offender pretending to push an invisible cart or balance a basket on their head. One curious variant required people to mimic a drunken god, stumbling and muttering to reflect how disorderly they'd let their spirit become. Historians still argue whether this ritual was born of performance art, penitential theater, or some fusion of religious teaching and public spectacle. But it worked. No one forgot it. And the offender, well, they rarely made the same mistake twice. You spend those 4 days becoming a local performance piece. At the market, you crouch under your imaginary idol. At the river, you pretend it tips backward while you scrub clothes. The neighborhood kids giggle. A grandmother offers you an invisible tortilla. You nod and eat it, grimacing under your invisible load. At night, you have to sleep sitting up. After all, idols aren't known for being cuddly. On the second day, you meet another punished soul, a farmer who skipped a moon offering and now has to sing every sentence he says, using ceremonial tones. You exchange sympathetic glances. His voice cracks during "please pass the beans." Some French communities went even further with invisible punishment. One record from the Gulf Coast describes an offender forced to mime an entire fishing trip, line, bait, fish and all, for 3 consecutive dawns. If anyone interrupted him or pointed out an inconsistency, like reeling in a fish backwards, he had to start over. The Aztecs didn't need iron bars to make you feel confined. They just needed ritualized shame, magnified through creative public expression. And weirdly, it worked, because by the 4th day, something shifts in you. You begin to feel the weight of your imaginary idol as real. Not physically, but emotionally. You realize how often you move through your day without thinking, without meaning. You think about the missed ritual. You wonder what forgiveness you were meant to ask for. So on the morning of the 5th day, you present yourself at the temple. No one told you to. You're just ready. You kneel, this time early. You light your own incense. You whisper apologies into the smoke. Then, as tradition dictates, you blow 3 breaths over your shoulder to cast off the burden. And you feel it lift. You rise a little taller. Somewhere in the crowd, someone claps. It might be sarcastic. It might not. But for once, you don't care. Because you're walking home without imaginary straps biting into your shoulders. Your back is sore, sure, but your spirit? Surprisingly light. Still, you make a mental note to double knot your sleeping mat and ask your neighbor to knock on your door next time there's a dawn ritual. Just in case the gods aren't done with you yet. So you've survived invisible burdens. You've mimed, grunted, winced, and even accepted an invisible tortilla like the culturally respectful mime you've become. You think, maybe just maybe you're in the clear. Maybe now, the gods and your neighbors will cut you some slack. Then you try to game the tribute system. Not a full scam. Just a little adjustment. You were supposed to offer 10 cacao beans as part of the seasonal tribute to the temple. But hey, times are tight and you really wanted that honey cake the vendor was hawking. So you handed over 8 real beans and 2 painted pebbles, hoping no one would notice. They noticed. Of course they noticed. This is the Aztec Empire. Cacao beans are currency. People bite them to test their authenticity. They examine them like modern-day jewelers squinting at diamonds. And you? You tried to sneak in pebbles with badly painted stripes. The paint's already rubbing off. One of the temple attendants holds it up and sniffs it like it's a suspicious burrito. Now everyone's looking at you again. Welcome to the next bizarre punishment, the mock marketplace. This one's delightfully layered. You're sentenced to appear in the next market day not as a shopper or vendor but as a living counterfeit. You're dressed in exaggerated finery made from junk, a robe of stitched-together corn husks, a headdress made of fish bones and clay scraps, sandals woven from vines and painted to look like leather. Then, in the center of the market, a stall is built around you. A sign reads, "True value?" You decide. That's right. You're the exhibit. The living embodiment of what happens when someone tries to cheat the sacred economy. You're forced to hype yourself like a bad product, calling out ridiculous slogans like, 100% fake. Twice the shame for half the cost. Guaranteed to offend gods and neighbors alike. Buy now, never trust again. Some fringe versions of this punishment even included price tags on the person's body, one on the ear, one on the elbow, one on the big toe. People were encouraged to haggle for pieces of your dignity verbally, of course. Historians still argue whether this punishment was more street theater than actual justice. Some say it began as a satire used during market festivals, then evolved into a judicial tool for economic offenses like tribute fraud, false weights, or counterfeit currency. One codex illustration shows a man with oversized cacao pods strapped to his back, each labeled with words like lies and greed. Another depicts a woman seated on a throne of painted rocks, forced to eat air while miming satisfaction. The message, you can't fake worth. Back in your case, the temple priests don't let you go it alone. A pair of young acolytes accompany you, shouting mock advertisements as they walk in circles, limited time offer, guilt, embarrassment, and the wrath of Quetzalcoatl all included. The crowd loves it. Kids laugh. Elders shake their heads. Someone tosses you an actual cacao bean, then takes it back. The performance lasts for one full market cycle, sunrise to sunset. You can't leave your stall. You can't drop character. If someone tries to buy something, you must explain that you're already sold to shame. You're not physically harmed. But emotionally? This one hurts. Because tribute isn't just about economics. It's spiritual currency. You give to the gods so they give back rain, crops, protection. Trying to cheat that? You're not just stealing beans. You're trying to shortchange the entire cosmic ledger. The penalty ends with a ritual offering. You must present double what you owed, 20 real cacao beans, and place them inside a jaguar-shaped incense burner. Then, with everyone watching, you speak 3 truths about your mistake. You're not allowed to say, "I was just hungry," or "I thought I could get away with it." You have to go deeper. So you do. You admit you feared not having enough. You say you thought no one would care. You confess that somewhere inside you thought you mattered more than the balance. And when the incense begins to rise, no one claps. No one jeers. There's just a soft hush as the scent of cacao and burning copal fills the air. Someone, maybe the same vendor you tricked, hands you a real honey cake. No charge. The lesson sticks. Next tribute day, you give your offering with care. You even toss in an extra bean, just to make sure the gods see you're really, really sorry. And the painted pebbles? You keep one. Not to deceive, but as a tiny reminder tucked in your sash. A reminder that real value can't be faked, and that the price of shame is always more than you think. You've been a walking mime, a human billboard, a makeshift piñata for society's disapproval. And now, just when your reputation is patching itself back together like a frayed reed mat, you sneeze during a fire ritual. Not a regular sneeze, mind you. A thunderous, temple-shaking, snot-rocketing eruption during the sacred lighting of the new fire ceremony, which only happens every 52 years. It's the kind of noise that makes birds scatter and priests drop their obsidian knives. The fire had just been kindled. The gods were being summoned. And you, in a moment of unfiltered humanity, launched a sneeze heard across Tenochtitlan. Silence follows, thick and horrifying. Then someone mutters the worst phrase imaginable. He has disrupted the divine flame. Welcome to your next punishment, the trial of the ash-eater. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. This bizarre punishment is reserved for anyone who is seen as tainting sacred ceremonies, especially fire-based ones. Fire, to the Aztecs, was more than just light and warmth. It was a living god, a devourer of time, a cleanser of chaos. To disrupt it, even accidentally, was to risk cosmic offense. So the priests take you aside. You're given a simple robe, painted with smudges of gray and black, like smoke stains. Your face is dusted with charred incense ash, making your nose twitch every few seconds. Yes, more sneezing. Then you're led to a ceremonial fire pit where a shallow pile of cold ash from sacred fires is waiting. You kneel. And here comes the weird part. You must eat a spoonful of ash for every god represented at the ceremony. This particular fire rite involved 9 deities. So, 9 spoonfuls. Not mouthfuls, just pinches taken with a ritual spoon carved from eagle bone. The ash isn't toxic, but it tastes like burnt regret and old incense sticks. Your tongue goes dry. Your teeth feel like sandpaper. Your stomach protests quietly. But the real punishment isn't the ash. It's the day-long rest.